My name's Doug Wilson. I'm on the board of MN365, so definitely appreciate David speaking today and everybody for attending. Again, we put these user groups on for the community. It's really appreciated. We want to share as much as we can and help people out. And then this session is, as you can see in the slide, you have sensitive information, now let's protect it. Oddly enough, people should protect sensitive data. And just some notes that I always like to share at the beginning of any presentation, in case somebody has forgotten about online etiquette. We are recording our meetings just to make sure people can review them later. Ask that you keep yourself muted unless you have a question where you can come off mute at an appropriate time or ask the speaker with a raised hand. Otherwise, feel free to put questions in chat. Either myself, who will be monitoring that chat, or David will definitely be able to see and respond to questions in a timely manner. If you need live captioning, as it says, go ahead and turn that on. Let me know if you need help with that. At the end of this session, we'll be giving away a $25 gift card. It is based on people's activity and response to anything that David's asking or questions that you have that come up. So definitely encourage interaction. And then, of course, at the end of this event today, after 4 o'clock, I think is the end of it, we have an overall survey that definitely I appreciate that you respond to it as honest as possible, just so we know how the user group and our event day went, as our user group, our virtual day went today, and enters you for the grand prize, I believe, for a Surface Go. Trust me, I would love to have that and win one of those so I have a personal laptop again. And our sponsors, of course, as always, our sponsors make these events possible. Generic spiel, of course, but nope, in all honesty, RBA, Cyber Advisor, Sky North, Concurrency are sponsoring today's event. So it's been very, very helpful. So appreciate everything. And then if anybody has questions, throw them in chat. Otherwise, David, I can hand that over to you.
All right. See if I can get this, let this start up without a hitch here.
I'm sure you're spotlighted at least.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so let's get this started. So yeah, so thanks for the introduction there. And yeah, we'll be talking today about protecting your information. And you know, the idea behind this one is that, you know, especially with the pandemic, things have moved a whole lot more into the cloud, and Microsoft adoption has been, you know, really great and really building. And, you know, along with that comes, you know, some certain dangers around, you know, around your data. And we want to make sure we protect that. So that's the whole purpose of this project today. So just to, you know, start things off here, I'll let you know my name is David Drever. I'm Senior Manager of Protiviti, and I lead the technical consulting group within Protiviti Canada, in Western Canada specifically. You have my email there. It's david.drever@protiviti.com, and I also tweet at David M. Drever, and I blog at prairiedeveloper.com. And I need to update this, but you can get to it from my blog, as I have started releasing some videos as well on you know, the different things within records management and compliance and security and that sort of thing. So just kind of go over what we're going to cover today. And I do apologize, my voice gets a little raspy. Unfortunately, I was sick all last week. I'm sure you can understand what it might have been, and I'm just kind of getting my voice back from that. So so if I get a little raspy, I do apologize. I'll do my best to make sure you guys can still hear me. But what we'll talk about today is we'll talk about, you know, Microsoft information protection, what that is, how that ties into also data loss prevention and protecting your data. From there, we'll move on to some conditional access and controlling access into your environment. And then also, of course, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, which used to be called, you know, Advanced Threat Protection at one time. And then, of course, we'll finish off with Defender for Cloud Apps, which used to be called Microsoft Cloud App Security. You know, MCAS kind of rolled off the tongue really nice, and then they went and changed the name, and it's not as much fun to say or not as easy to say, but it's the same thing. So moving on here, you know, I want to talk about why is security important, and why do you need to really worry about this? You know, is it not just set up, you know, when you're in the cloud, you don't have to worry about your passwords and things like that. Your passwords are good enough. Let's find out why. So the biggest thing here is that, you know, over 70% of enterprises today, and probably that number is after the pandemic, is probably upwards in the 90s, you know, have some component that's actually in the cloud. You know, not in their own private data centers, they have something in the cloud that they're using. And you know, along with that is that you know, they predict they're going to be investing a lot of money into this and building out their own cloud infrastructure and that sort of thing. And because your information is in the cloud, there's a good chance you have, you know, personal identifiable information, or PII, you know, other sensitive information that's being included with those technologies that are existing in the cloud. But the sad thing, or the scary thing about it, is that less than half of these organizations actually have a formal cloud security policy. What do they do to protect their users and their information from being in the cloud?
And that from Citrix?
I'm sorry?
I think he's unmuted. I'll mute him.
Thank you. All right, and then, you know, security breaches, they do occur. You know, it's estimated that 79% of large U.S. businesses and 49% of Canadian large businesses had a data breach in 2021. You know, and again, you know, the small medium businesses, they were hit too, 61% and 50% in 2021 too. And keep in mind, this is based on, you know, information that was actually shared. There's probably lots of organizations out there that may not have shared this publicly that we don't know about. So that number could be even higher. You know, what I guess it depends too, is what's the definition of a security breach? Is, you know, a loss of data, updates of data, that kind of thing. It all depends on the interpretation. But the fact of the matter is, security breaches happen and you have to protect against that. So let's talk a little bit about Microsoft 365 security. And this isn't any particular product. This is just, what does Microsoft 365 do for you just out of the box? And the biggest thing it does to start off with is that, you know, you do have a number of features that are available to you. You know, you have your Active Directory, you know, that controls the security features, but those security features are also in Exchange. So Exchange has its own special security features, but they also integrate with other things like Microsoft Information Protection. You can track a lot of things that happen within the organization, and really pretty much anything that happens through Azure Audit Logs. So you have that right away. Everything that, any piece of communication that occurs within M365 is fully encrypted and protected with SSL and TLS encryption. It will not transmit data if there is no secure connection at all. So at the very beginning, you know, without even having to do anything, you do have that encryption in place. And of course, everything's permission controlled. So you can't access, you know, locations with data unless you have permission to do so. You know, yes, there's a way to get around that. What I mean by that is that if you don't have, you know, security in place, you can share information with people that maybe shouldn't have access to that. And we'll get into that here in a minute on how you protect against that. But in general, you know, just out of the box, you have security control permissions, you have encryption, you have tools that integrate with these other components that they use in everyday life that allows you to protect your data. So that's just, you know, just out of the box, and without even having to do any configuration, you have that protection. But when you're ready to add that extra level protection to your environment, you know, what are your options? And one of the first ones that I always recommend for any client is Microsoft Information Protection. And this is the newer version of what was once known as Azure Information Protection. But they now, you know, they kind of brought it all together under one umbrella. And the idea behind it here is that this is the ability to label your content based on the sensitivity of it. And, you know, you can classify that data as part of that. So is this is this public information or is this internal only? So it's not, not too dangerous if it gets out, but it's meant to be internal only. Maybe it's confidential or restricted. And when you get into that kind of a level, now you want to think about doing things like encrypting your data or that sort of thing. You have the ability to auto apply or auto recommend sensitivity as well. So you can create rules that allow you to actually look at the data that's contained within in the content, and looking for specific wording, looking for particular patterns like credit card numbers or social security numbers, that sort of thing. And it can actually do recommendations and saying, hey, this has got some PII information in it, so you may want to make this restricted because it should only be available to certain people. And then MIP, or Microsoft Information Protection, is that it actually integrates with anything within Microsoft 365 where you store content. But specifically here to think about it is that it doesn't apply to the containers that the document is in. It actually applies to the document itself. So what that means is that if I have a document that I've encrypted, or at the very least I have added some particular tags to because it is a certain level of protection, of sensitivity, but I need to give it to someone so they can do their work. They don't exist in my organization. And I have, they have previously approval to receive this information, I can give it to them. And it can be encrypted to just their use and that sort of thing. But what's great about this is that even though that is no longer inside my control, in my domain, the protections that I applied to it through MIP are attached to the document itself. So what that means is that document is actually protected even when it's no longer in my control. And they can't remove those protections. So what that does then is that allows you to maintain your content's protections, even in situations where the content is no longer in your SharePoint or in your email or in your own network drives, or whatever the case may be. And you can actually track that too. So let's say, for instance, that I give a document to someone and then they forward it on to somebody, and they're not supposed to, but they did it anyways. I actually have the ability to see where that document was tracked and moved around. And so if someone tries to open up that document and the person I gave it to them is in Calgary, Alberta, here in Canada, and they forward it to Doug in Minnesota, I can actually say, oh, I can go and take a look and see Doug tried to open it, or this document was tried to be accessed in Minnesota, and that isn't true. So I can actually remove access to that document and block its access entirely. The idea behind this is that Microsoft Information Protection, when you try to open the document, it first goes out to its controllers and to see if the person who's opening it is actually allowed to open it. So it doesn't block things like the title of the document, it just blocks the contents. So Chris asked the question, is MIP limited to specific file types? Absolutely not. So information protection, Microsoft Information Protection will integrate directly with your Office documents and PDFs and things like that. And on top of that, you have what's called the Microsoft Information Protection Client. And the idea behind that one is that if you have non-standard files like a zip file or a JPEG or a TIFF file, that kind of thing, you can still encrypt that, and what'll happen is it actually wraps it up in a protected file, and it's still protected at that point. It won't be open natively at that point, but it does have that ability to add that extra protection. If someone uses an alternate application such as Office, OpenOffice, will MIP still apply? So it will, because what will happen is that OpenOffice will not have the ability to open that document. So it'll actually prompt you to download the necessary tools to do so. And then on top of that, we have some server-side capabilities, and this is where you come into your automating your labeling of content. So you can actually tell the system to, if it happens to find content that has credit card information in it, or social security numbers, that sort of thing, you can actually set the system to label the content on your behalf. In this case, it does have to exist in Microsoft 365, so it has to exist in a SharePoint site, OneDrive, or Teams, which is just SharePoint in the back end, and Exchange as well. But it doesn't. It won't do it in file shares and things like that. There is a tool called the AIP Scanner that you can use to scan your file shares and things like that you can use to auto apply sensitivity, but it doesn't work from within Microsoft 365. The AIP Scanner acts as a connector between the Microsoft 365 environment and your local file shares. From a user experience, it's pretty straightforward. You have a couple of options. You have a I'll have to update this the screenshot. So where it says protect is actually called sensitivity now, but you also do have a sensitivity toolbar, so you can actually choose right there on the screen. Is this a general? Is this client confidential? Is it restricted? And then what happens, depending on the configurations, is the ability here is you can actually add headers and footers and watermarks. You can choose different colors and font sizes and label wording. And the reason behind this is when you are dealing with sensitive information and MIP labels, you don't want to just encrypt everything. And the reason for that is because every time you encrypt something, it adds a little time to open it up for everyone. 3 or 4 seconds. And, that doesn't give a great user experience. So the recommendation is that you maybe provide, headers or footers or watermarks to let users know that they're dealing with something that needs to be considered more confidential, something that, I shouldn't be sending to someone outside the organization. So the idea is to put some of the onus on the user as well. And what the sensitivity label does is it helps you see, what type of document this is. So, if I happen to see that the footer says public, that means I know I can share with others. If I happen to see that the document is internal only, it doesn't necessarily have to have a watermark to get in the way, but it could be confidential or internal only. But the idea behind that is that I can see on the screen, because the label has applied it for me, and it will actually allow me as the user to see, okay, I shouldn't be sharing this with someone else. Do you need Adobe Acrobat to encrypt PDF files, or can you use the MS Word online reader? So when it comes to encrypting, the MIP client will do the encrypting for you. What you do need, however, is what's called an MIP add-on for Adobe. And so the idea behind that is that Adobe will actually open up the document for you with that, and it will actually has the ability with that add-on to open up the encrypted document. Microsoft Word Online Reader, I believe, would work with an encrypted PDF if it has the ability to read the PDF itself. So, and you can actually add, some people might remember some of those old RMS controls. They still exist. You can actually add more controls in there for, being able to say if a person can edit or print or, that kind of thing. They're still there, but for the most part, they're not used as much anymore, because the encryption can stop people from actually forwarding it or sharing it outside. So if it's that confidential so that you don't want them to be able to print, you can actually apply that control on the label as well. All right. So I do have, if I have time, I do have the ability to show you some demos here, but I want to get through the slides first, and then make sure that I have time at the end to do so. I did see a question about the AIP Scanner. So the AIP Scanner, I believe you can use with an E3, but if you want to apply your sensitivity automatically, you have to have an E5 license for that. The AIP Scanner can be used, though, to help you find sensitive information. as well as apply a sensitivity to it. So moving on to data loss prevention. So the idea behind data loss prevention is protecting your content from going outside of the organization when it shouldn't be. And so, think about situations where, users are, they're leaving the organization and they want to take some information with them, or, sending information to employees who weren't part of the organization anymore, but they happen to know, hey, I knew about this document that I was working on, or was working with somebody on, and that would really help me with what I'm doing right now. You don't want to be able to send that information on because they're no longer with the company. They're no longer required to protect information the way they were when they were an employee. You don't want information to get out to competitors or the media in some cases. So that's the idea behind data loss prevention is whether it's malicious or accidental, the idea is you don't want your confidential, your sensitive information to go and get into hands of people who shouldn't have access to them. So what data loss prevention does is it helps you, train your users, or actually actively block your users from sharing that information outside when they shouldn't be. Now, if my data is already secured by passwords and it's in this encrypted environment, isn't that good enough? And unfortunately, the answer is not necessarily no. It's not necessarily yes. It's not good enough, because security and passwords, like permission security, only protects that data at the source. So yeah, you can put your protections on SharePoint, and only certain people get into SharePoint sites. I can have access to highly confidential information in a SharePoint site, but that doesn't stop me from downloading that document and sending it out to somebody. So that's why security protections aren't necessarily enough. And external breaches, we've already talked about, they do occur, so maybe someone can get in that way. And then you may have locations that are not inside of Microsoft 365 where the content may not be stored in encrypted format. So the content could be wide open if someone was to get access to it. So, adding these extra protections, it is important to consider this. And how does that data get outside of my organization? So you can email it out, external cloud storage. So, everyone uses, or most people use OneDrive. That's controlled by your tenant, by your organization. But what about, other tools? There's also personal OneDrive. There's Dropbox, there's Box, there's all these different kinds of, tools out there that provide cloud storage that, if your organization isn't blocking it, and in some cases they may not be able to because they're now hybrid, you're working from home, so you're not behind a network that's blocking that. So, that's the way how data can get out, is through these external cloud storages. Portable storage, USB key that has data storage on it, and again, malicious intrusion. So these are all different ways that data is actually getting out today. So what is data loss prevention in Microsoft 365? So it's not just about protecting things that you have flagged as sensitive data, but it also helps you locate that data and report on it. The idea behind it is that you may not actually know that this externally shared SharePoint site has employee records in it, or it has credit card information in it. Good question, Daniel. Do you think pics with cameras or smartphones are also a source of data leak? Absolutely, because someone can take pictures of information and they can be added to that. And then what's happening now these days, and I don't believe it's there yet, but with the advancement in AI, they could actually detect things that are on a picture. So that what that means is that eventually even these pictures that have sensitive information in there, they are going to be shown as being sensitive as well. So yeah, absolutely, it's a good question, and definitely yes, it is could be a source of a data leak as well. But the thing here, sorry, I was just talking about there, is with data loss prevention is it's not just about stopping someone from sharing information, but it's also about letting admins and data owners know where that data resides. So data loss prevention will actually scan SharePoint and Exchange and OneDrive and Teams, and it'll actually flag it in those locations as having sensitive data. It'll provide reports back to people who need to know that they have sensitive data in these locations. And then, so what makes up a data loss prevention policy? And so it's comprised of a couple of components. The first one being conditions. What is it looking for? What is it? What is it the kind of data you're trying to stop, and the actions you need to do to move forward. And they can be applied to specific locations. You can have just one rule inside of your DLP policy. You can have multiple rules inside of your DLP policy. But the key thing here is that you can have more than one policy, and you can have multiple rules so that it looks for this data and looks for that data, and it if it sees this data, it does this, and if it sees that data, it does that kind of thing. I do suggest, though, that when you're setting up policies, that you don't lump all of your rules into one policy, separate them out. And the reason being is that in some cases, if something goes wrong with the policy, it gets really hard to know which policy was affected if they're all in one, or where the policy was affected. So, because your reporting is going to do it based on the policy itself, not on the rules within. So if it's, if you see something was flagged as sensitive when it shouldn't have been, you can see which policy flagged it or which policy blocked it, but you won't know which rule inside did so. So there's no huge limitation. There is a limitation on policies. I think it's in the thousands of policies and things like that. But one thing to be aware of is that you can create multiple rules for checking for data, but I suggest you keep that to a minimum. Usually what I usually do is when I'm creating policies, like, a low threshold and a high threshold. So if I see this type of data, but only a couple of items in a document that I'm sharing, I'll maybe send a warning. If it's a high threshold, there's lots of content in here, like an entire spreadsheet of credit card numbers, then the high threshold rule for the same the same category fires, but this time it blocks. And that can be contained in the same policy. System is, there we go. Okay. So another thing to consider too is that you have within your rules, you can set up notifications. And then, what does that mean is do I want users to know that we're blocking this? And do I want them to know why they're blocking this? Or you don't have to give them any notification whatsoever. You're just going to report on it. But you can also make sure your administrators know what's going on. So within the rules themselves, you can actually control who gets notifications. If it's a blocking DLP policy, which means that it's actually blocking users from, excuse me, sending out their data, you could actually give them the ability to override. So, it could be an actual business reason that they are actually sending out this data. And when they have to override, when they give the ability to override, they have to provide a justification, and all of that is all audited. So you can say that you can see that the document was the DLP policy fired, and the user said, no, I'm actually doing this for a real reason. This is necessary for the business. They provide that justification, and that's all audited. So you can go back and see, why did Dave share this document? And you can see, okay, so Dave said this reason, and you can follow up with Dave if you need to. And of course, there's reports can be created on top of this as well. Weekly, monthly reports that just kind of give you a high level of what was done in that particular period of time for that particular rule. Can you specify groups for the admin notification, or is it individuals only? Mail-enabled groups, Karen. So if you have a mail-enabled group, you can go out to multiple users. Otherwise, it would have to be added individually. So this is how the policy kind of works. So your content is created. Search actually crawls this. So this is why this is how DLP policies works. It actually searches that content and it indexes it. And then after it's indexed that information, what it actually does is it actually determines if there's any policies that are affected or should affect this information based on the information in the index. And then policies are applied. You make a change to your document, the whole process goes around again. Because what happens now is that, 2 days ago, this was just a normal document. And then today I updated and said, oh, I forgot to add the credit card number for this particular invoice or something along that line. So what happens is that index will run again. It'll see, oh, there's a credit card number in there. I'm going to check to see if I have a policy. And the policy is going to say, oh, can't have credit card numbers. So it's going to now flag it. So DLP policies are constantly being reevaluated. And they're constantly running against the index. So as your content is being updated, it'll actually apply policies as necessary. And what you'll see sometimes is that if you were in a document for a while and you add some credit cards and stuff like that, and it saves, and what'll happen is that in a few minutes you may actually get a pop-up saying, oh, we've detected that there is a credit card number in here. Just to let you know about that. So it's constantly running, and they can get alerts in real time. All right, conditional access. So now we're kind of moving away from the actual protection of the content itself to more into the protection of the environment. And conditional access is probably one of the most common tools for that. The idea behind conditional access, it's a feature of the Azure AD, and on top of that, you can actually have users, and users can be part of the conditional access policy. You can have mail-enabled groups as part and security groups as part of that policy. So you don't have to target just a few users. But basically, what it boils down to is that a conditional access policy is an if-then statement in the back end. What are they trying to do, and what am I going to do about it? It's not limited to just SharePoint or OneDrive. Anything that is part of your Microsoft 365, Office 365, Azure space can all be controlled with conditional access. And what that does is it kind of helps build out a zero trust policy for your user access. So, the idea behind it is, if I've got some highly confidential sites or highly confidential information, and David logs in, I don't trust that's actually David. So I can say, if he's going to access a particular file, I want to make sure he's using multi-factor authentication. So that's the idea behind this zero trust. So why do you want conditional access to be used? It's really there because it's there for real-time monitoring of your sessions. Properly configured conditional access policies, they're going to monitor when a user accesses a resource, and they can also monitor that for inconsistencies. So, for example, you could have a user can be allowed access to a resource when connecting from, a particular location. But if they're suddenly, located in another country, or in maybe in some cases another city where they shouldn't be, you could actually have conditional access policies that actually will block them or require them to log in with MFA in order to ensure that they are who they say they are. So, this all happens in real time, because for one thing, you don't want users to access, or you want users to be able to access content when they need to, but at the same time, you don't want to wait until audit logs are published or notifications go out to find out that someone's been in a system. So that's why real time is a big thing here, and it's really granular as well. So you base conditions on as things like an operating system. Are they coming in from an Android phone or an Apple phone, or are they coming in from a Linux box or something along that line? You can actually look at particular IP addresses and geographical locations. Even so much as even having what the version of the application is being used. So you can actually control, if they're using Microsoft Office, 2003, which is before they had modern authentication, you can actually block that tool from accessing the system because it doesn't have the proper authentication capabilities. So this is how a conditional access process works. And the idea behind it is that you get a signal. And I'll talk about all these things here in just a second, but the idea is you get a signal. That signal then tells the system what are they trying to do, and then the system has to make a decision. Are they going to allow them to have access? Are they going to increase the level of assurance? So are they going to require MFA? Are they going to outright block access? And then the third piece of the conditional access is the enforcement of that decision. Letting them through, no problems. Give them an MFA prompt, that sort of thing. So, excuse me. A signal is basically the notification of what you're trying to attain. What are you trying to do? Am I accessing SharePoint? Am I accessing a particular location in SharePoint? Am I trying to access, a Power Platform, Power Automate? Am I trying to go into an Azure VM? These are all things that it's going to say. But on top of that, it's going to look at who's trying to do this. Is it coming from a particular IP address that we don't necessarily trust? Or is a known IP address that we don't want access to, or IP address range? Are they trying to access through a particular version of Office? Again, if I'm trying to, if I open up a document in SharePoint, but I'm using a really old version of Office, you may not want that particular version of Office to be used. So these are all things that the signal is actually looking for. And then it integrates as well with Azure Identity Protection. So then you can have things like user risk and risky logins and things like that. So if for some reason I happen to, again, and this actually happened to me once when I was doing a presentation a couple of years ago. I had logged into my dev tenant, and I was in Vancouver, and then I had flown to San Francisco for a conference, and I got to San Francisco, and I opened up and accessed my tenant again, and I got prompted for MFA because my systems saw that I had what they call an impossible travel. So I had opened from two really far away locations in a short time. And so what happened is that it flagged me as a medium to high user risk. And I had a conditional access policy that said if somebody comes in with a higher medium user login risk, that you require MFA. So that's what it does. So it actually looks into all of these different things, and it makes those decisions and determines whether it can let you in or not, or block you. So, and then on top of that too, then we have to talk about the decision and enforcement. So again, these are all part of the configurations, and if I have time, I'll definitely show you that. I should have time to show you what these things are and how they look. But the idea behind it is maybe if you're going to be logged in, you have to have a trusted or compliant device, or something that's hybrid Azure AD joined, or you're using an approved app. So, if I try to open up using Office 2003, it'll block me. But then if I try to open up the same document from the same system using, Office 365 version of Word, it'll let me through. So these are things that your decision and enforcement is going to allow you to do. And it works well with others. So, it integrates with Intune. It's part of Azure AD, so it integrates with all those different components as well. I talked about how it integrates with user risk and things like that. So you have your cloud app security as part of it as well. So all of these components work with conditional access to make sure that you can protect your system as you need, but make it as seamless. Because these are all systems that you're already using, it makes it as seamless for users as possible. Let's talk about some leading practices. I hate calling things best practices because best practices have a chance of changing. So at this current time, these are leading practices. One of the biggest ones is you don't want to deploy new policies with everyone. you want to employ it to your administrators after you've tested it. And the reason for that is because if you deploy it to everyone, and including your administrators, and it blocks, for whatever reason you made a mistake, and it blocks access to a resource or blocks access to the tenant, no one's getting in, because you haven't said there's some people who aren't included in this policy, you haven't properly tested it yet, and they broke something. So you don't want to add your administrators, because you need your administrators to get in there and change it. Now, having said that, once you've tested the policy, include your administrators, because you want your administrators to have the same controls in place for you. And in some cases, you want your administrators to have more control. For example, if you're logging in with an administrator account, you want to make sure that they are always who they say they are. You always want to have MFA. So you could have an always MFA conditional access policy if a user logs in with an administrator account. When you happen to create a new policy, you can actually use a what if tool. And what the what if tool does is you can put in there a scenario where, say David is logging in from the US and he's trying to access, SharePoint site. What's going to happen? When you put all that into this tool, and it's going to say, well, David is logging in from a non-trusted location because he's Canadian. He should be in a Canadian office, but he's logging in from the US. So it's going to hit the policy that requires MFA. And so what you're doing is you're simulating these situations. You can do it based on different users. You can do it based on different applications. But the idea behind it is, before you enable these policies, you can actually see, are they going to fire as expected? The other thing too is that, you can actually have conditional access administrators. That's the role of that account. And the idea behind it, you kind of want to use dedicated accounts and make sure that dedicated account is excluded from the policies. And that dedicated account isn't always assigned to someone all the time. I'm not too sure if anyone's familiar with a concept in Azure called privileged identity management. What privileged identity management does is it allows you to, attach roles and administration roles and different things to your account, but they don't have to be active all the time. So you're not always a global admin, or you're not always a SharePoint admin, but you have the ability to become a global admin of the SharePoint admin. So the idea behind that is, only have certain users who are approved for accessing conditional access, and give them the conditional access security role. Exclude them from the policies if necessary, or exclude the role from the policy, and then the only reason they can get in is if they activate their access into conditional access. So, these kind of things, because the idea behind it is you always want to have one account, at least one account. You can call it your break glass account, that is not going to be affected by any of your policies. Because if something happens, even if it's a change by Microsoft that changes how your conditional access policy works, or you make a mistake, you always want to have one account that is not affected by any of the security within your organization. We call that a break glass account. So a break glass account is an account that's not assigned to any one user. Its password is super complicated, and the password is kept in a secure location. And I mean, like, I'm actually saying, like a safe that only a few people have access to. This account then is a global admin. It doesn't have any conditional access policies applied to it. Doesn't have any other controls applied to it. And what it's there for is simply accessing the system if something is done that breaks the system's access. So, that's why you have this break glass account, and you want to make sure that if you have this concept of a break glass account in your organization, that it is always in the exclusion list for your conditional access policy. All right. So moving on to Defender for Office 365. So again, this used to be called Advanced Threat Protection. So the idea behind Microsoft Defender for Office 365 is that this is dealing more with the social aspect. Things like, the attacks can come in through emails or attachments, things that concentrate more on the malware, and maybe, hack basic attacks, but the hacks when they trick you into giving their passwords. You're not actually trying to go in through any sort of try to get in through the perimeter. You're actually just getting in through because they managed to determine what your password was or something along that line. It integrates actually ATP now, or sorry, Defender for Office 365. It does actually integrate now with SharePoint and Teams. So it'll actually look at files that you upload and say, oh, there's links in this document that should not be there, or that particular file that was just uploaded actually contains malware. So at one time it was just in email, so it only affected email through the Exchange Online Protection controls. But now it actually integrates into SharePoint and Teams as well. And because it's in SharePoint, it's also in OneDrive as well. So, and it provides the real time. So as soon as you upload the document, it's going to scan that document and it's going to say, oh, can't have it, can't access this document, it's blocked, and then alerts will go out as necessary. There's different components to Defender for Office 365. You have the first one is called Safe Attachments. And that's exactly what it sounds like. The idea behind this one is it scans all the attachments for all the emails coming in. And then as the content comes in, it checks to see, does the email contain an attachment? Does an attachment contain malware? And you have some options for delivery. You can simply just monitor it. So if the document comes in, does the user click on the attachment? And if they click on attachment, do they forward it off to anybody else? So you can monitor it. You can outright block it, so they don't actually get the email or the attachment. You can do what's called a replace. And what a replace does is it says basically you get the email with the email information in it, but it takes out the attachment and just puts in a text file that says this email contained a file that had malware or something along that line. You can also enable redirect. So the idea behind enable redirect is that it redirects the email to a quarantine, basically, that users can, or that administrators can check out the email and then release as necessary. And then the one that I like is called dynamic delivery. And the idea behind dynamic delivery is that the email is still sent to the user immediately, even if the scanning of the attachment isn't complete. Because sometimes you have time-sensitive information in the body of an email. So you don't want to hold up the email being delivered to the user because of scanning the attachment. Some email clients attach like signatures and contact cards and things like that. They put it in as attachments as opposed to embedding it right into your document or into your email. So what that saves you from is in cases where the user aren't even realizing they're sending you an attachment, or that your system sees it as an attachment, it doesn't block you from getting the information. So what'll happen is you'll get the email, you'll actually see the file as an attachment, but it's just going to say it's currently being scanned, and I think it actually says ATP scanning. And so what'll happen is that you can read the email, you can look at the contents of the email, and then once the email has, or the attachment has been scanned, it replaces the original email that you opened up with the actual email that came in from the sender, and it'll have the attachment in there. So that's the idea behind dynamic delivery. And I prefer that one. It's my recommendation to clients because it gives you the ability to monitor and block as necessary, but it doesn't hold up the email in the cases when it's time sensitive. Same thing too is that you can actually, the safe attachments usage is used in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams as well. And even in your instant messages within Teams, if you put an attachment in there, it'll scan it before it lets you open it. Safe links is very similar to safe attachments, except in this case, it actually checks the link in the email, that if you have an URL in there, and it tests it from beginning to end. So it doesn't just check to see where the URL is going to. It'll actually travel that route, and it'll go to that URL and ensure that the site that you're going to doesn't contain malicious software on the site, or that it doesn't turn into a redirect that redirects you to a site that is malicious or has some malicious code in it. But what's come out recently too is the ability to do the same thing in Office documents. So if you have Office documents that are stored or connected, to your tenant, it's from Office 2013 up to the most current version, it'll actually scan the links within it as well. So it's not just the emails now, it's also all of your Office documents as well. It'll scan for you. And again, it won't actually let you go to the address that you click on in the link until it scans it ahead for you. And then the idea behind this, you have some options available there too. You can have it off and on, obviously. You can apply real time, so it scans it as you're using it. It can block you from actually clicking on the link before it has finished its scanning, so it has that ability too. And then apply this again, safe links to messages sent within the organization. So you can, I don't know why you'd ever want to turn this off, but you can turn off the ability to do safe links within the organization. The reason is, I don't know why you want to turn that off. You always want to have that on, because if somehow some malicious code gets in, you start having all of these spam mails going out. You don't want, and because it's coming from an internal email address, you don't want to ignore that. So you always want to have that turned on. You can also have the ability, if you don't, maybe because you're worried about tracking too much information, you don't want to know if the user clicks on it, you can turn that off. You can also allow, don't allow users to click through the original email, so you can actually, or URL, so you can actually block that, turn that on and off. And then finally, the do not rewrite the following URLs. So if you have particular, known URLs that could come up as being flagged as suspicious, you can actually tell the system, no, these are actually valid email or valid URLs, don't rewrite them. So you do have that ability to do that as well. Okay, that's a good point there, Christine. So Christine made a point here that you may want to turn it off if you have more than one tool. So there are other tools out there, absolutely, that handle HCP technology for you. So maybe you have another tool that handles the rewriting, or it handles internal scanning and that sort of thing. So that's a really good point. I never thought of that. Thank you. And then again, you have your anti-phishing policies. So again, this is something that happens in the back end, and what it does is it scans the pages you're going to, or the emails you're getting, to say, are they actually valid? Is this actually being sent by David, or is this actually a proper email and not someone that's just trying to, it says Amazon.com, but maybe it's not Amazon.com in actuality, or something like that. So, and what it does is it protects you against different types of phishing attacks. And so some of those attacks you can be protected against are, what's called spear phishing. So spear phishing is very user focused. It's got customized content that's specifically tailored to the targeted recipient. So, maybe they know that you are working with a particular site that requires logins in your day-to-day work. So they'll create a site, or they create an email that looks like it's coming from that site in order to get you to provide your information. Similar to that is whaling. And whaling is when you're kind of going for the big fish. So it's geared towards more your C-level recipients. So it's very similar to spear phishing, but it's geared more towards your executives and that sort of thing. Then you have what's called business email compromise. So it uses, forged trusted senders. Think of, financial officers or customers, trusted partners within the organization. It makes it seem like it's coming from them to trick the recipients into giving, approving payments or transferring funds or things like that. So that's some things that it protects against as well. And then it also protects against, in some cases, against ransomware. So, if ransomware could be coming to you through a phishing email, the system can run algorithms to check to see if that's actually occurring. So these are all different things that, the anti-phishing policies will protect you against. Again, nothing's 100% guaranteed. Things change, but it's better. It's really a very strong algorithm that gets updated. Microsoft's constantly monitoring the dark web and trends and things like that. So, as things start to show up, the algorithms all get tweaked in order to protect your organizations moving forward. And then you have, real-time reporting. So real-time reports allow admins to focus on the important security issues that are occurring, but also, allows them to determine if there's suddenly a rise in some suspicious activities. You may be seeing more clicking of attachments that shouldn't be, may indicate that maybe your users need some more training, or maybe you have had an influx of new users and interns and things like that haven't received their training yet, and you might need to make that a priority because you're seeing an influx of clicking on links and attachments they shouldn't be. Some different reports that you have access to is a threat protection report, and this informs of all the malicious emails and content from for Exchange Online Protection and ATP, and it kind of reports for the last 90 days. But what it does is it helps you with building trends and seeing things that are changing within your organization. You do have what was called the file attachments, file type report. It used to be its own report. It's been deprecated into that threat protection status report. And what it does is it just kind of reports on the different types of files that people are receiving that have malicious content. Similar to the file types, there's also the safe attachments message disposition report. Again, this is now part of the threat protection status report. And again, it reports on emails that have detected malicious content. And you also have the ability through PowerShell to run some other reports that include, top senders and recipients within the organization, top malware that's been trapped, some compromised users, that sort of thing. And all these reports are actually broken down by app. So did these Word document contain malicious emails or malicious macros or something like that? Or was it coming from an Outlook and users are clicking on the links and that sort of thing? And then you have what's called attack simulation. Really, that's what it's used for. You're not really trying to simulate an attack. You're trying to train your users based on using the tools within the system. And so what it does is, it simulates an attack within the organization. You can target specific users, and the idea behind it is it checks to see, it does credential harvesting. So it tries to get them to provide their password. Malware attachment, so it tries to get them to open up a malicious attachment. You can actually even get so deep as you can actually create an attachment that's perfectly fine, but it has a link inside to add an extra sneakiness to it. So while the attachment is fine, the link inside is not. As you see, again, you can check to see how many users clicked on it. Similarly with a link to malware. And then drive-by URL. So attacker sends a link over a message, and the link takes you to a page that's cloned that looks very, very similar to the Amazon page or your your personal email page or OWA or something along that line. And then the page just attempts to get your code, and it's just coming from an instant message and that sort of thing. So these are all different simulation tests that you can run within your organization with Microsoft 365. All right. So Defender for Cloud Apps, and it was, like I said before, it was formerly called Microsoft Cloud App Security, which is really nice. You can just call it MCAS. Can't call it MCAS anymore, so it doesn't quite roll off the tongue as nice anymore. But Defender for Cloud Apps, and the idea behind this is that this is your cloud access security broker. Basically, think of it as the perimeter to your tenant. This is where the first place that anybody accesses goes through Defender for Cloud Apps, and the last place they go is out through Defender for Cloud Apps. So you're always going to have, it's your first and your last point of defense within your organization. Okay, and so it sits between users who are outside the cloud, obviously, because all your content and stuff like that, that's in the cloud. The users are not. And so it sits between the users and the cloud. It monitors activities. It can enforce protections and policies, and it provides just that, that extra little bit of protection that you may be looking for. And like I said, it's your first point of entry and your final point of exit. So think of it as a cloud around your cloud. And what it helps to do is it helps protect against shadow IT. You take and assess and take steps. So what I mean by that is Defender for Cloud Apps can scan, I think it's like 16,000 different known cloud-based applications. So are you accessing content or passing content into these other applications? And it has 80 built-in risks that you can also build on and improve on. What's really great about it when it comes to shadow IT as well is that you can actually have ongoing uploads of your firewall logs, and it will scan those firewall logs for you to see, does Dave have Dropbox installed in the system when he shouldn't have? Is Dave using the Dropbox web client in order to send information, even though he doesn't have the software installed? So it gives you that ability to run, because even though you're not accessing Dropbox through Microsoft 365, because you're uploading, you still gotta go through the firewall. If you're in the office, you still need to go through that firewall, and you have that ability to see that when you upload the logs into your MCAS, into your Cloud App Security, Defender for Cloud Apps. And then of course you have these scanning all the time for information. So if and it's what kind of communicates with everything here as it's doing that, looking for all these possible threats like ransomware and malware and things like that. And you can create policies that protect content. Is David logging in from the US and trying to access this sensitive data? What do I want to do? And MCAS can actually, because it's seeing that first, it can actually block that for you or report on it as necessary. So this is kind of how MCAS works. As you can see, you have all these different devices, and you have firewalls, and you have proxies and stuff like that, and all the information goes through that dotted line there, and that dotted line is what provides the the communication for your connectors and your cloud discovery, your cloud app security. So even though I'm going to go and access the data in a cloud app on my tenant, I'm going to first get transferred over to check for things in the cloud app security before I get access into there. And that's the idea behind this. And you can do that. You can route applications through there. You can route specific proxies and source locations and stuff like that through different policies. Then you have on top of that, you have Conditional Access App Control. So you can actually flag applications in your cloud apps and then work with Conditional Access to put controls in place, and allows you for more active monitoring what's going on. So what happens is that you can actually, with the Conditional Access policy and the Cloud App Control, is if I'm accessing information with a particular application, I can actually then pass my session that I'm logging into directly over to MCAS. So it monitors everything very, very closely and makes sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and not accessing information I shouldn't be. So it's going to have that hard watch on my session at the same time. And then what this helps you do with these things is helps prevent data theft. So make sure I don't download things I'm not supposed to. Blocks the ability to take or uploading information that hasn't been marked for sensitivity in the environment. Or on the other side, you can actually use Cloud App Security or Defender for Cloud Apps to label your content. So I was working with a client that they couldn't always guarantee that information that was being uploaded into a particular location had an encrypting sensitivity label applied to it. And if that document happened to be any Office document or a PDF, I was able to create a Defender for Cloud Apps policy that actually watched the entire site and any file that was uploaded into any library in that site, if it didn't already have the let's say it's called the confidential label applied to it, it would actually apply that label for me. Jesse, you asked, do you see people using Defender for Cloud Apps to automatically apply sensitivity labels to documents? Yes. So I'm sorry, I guess I started asking that question before I saw your question. The challenges you are going to see, though, is that it's only going to do it for supported documents. So documents that are non-standard. So again, getting into your your JPEGs, your AVIs, or your MP4s, like your video files, things that are non-standard that people do store in SharePoint and Teams and OneDrive. It's not going to affect those. It can't, not today. Having said that, they're already making improvements. Like, it wasn't that long ago you couldn't do PDFs, you could only do Office documents. So they are working on it. So that would be the only concern I would have, or challenge, is that it's only going to affect documents that fall under the Microsoft Office umbrella and PDFs. All right. And so this is kind of how it looks like when it's working together. Is you've got your conditional access, you've got your Active Directory and your Intune, and you've got your Defender for Cloud Apps. The idea behind this is they're all working together because, when you're watching a session, let's say you're watching a session because Dave came in, he's accessing data, and we said anything that David accesses, we want to have the session actively monitored. So then what happens is conditional access kind of passes that over to Cloud App Security, so it monitors the session in real time. And then what happens is that in my session, I go to a different site. And so then Defender would then pass that over back to conditional access and just say, can Dave access this site? He has permissions, but should he be accessing it? And these are how he's accessing. He's accessing it with this tool, or he's accessing it from this location. And conditional access policy would then say, nope, Dave can't access that without MFA. So it raises the MFA, and then the session is passed back to conditional, or to Cloud Apps to monitor. All right, so we've got about 15-20 minutes. Is that correct? I believe I have till the bottom of the half hour here. So let's do a little bit of some demos here. Kind of show you where things are going. So I'm just going to stop showing my screen here for a second. And I'm going to bring up my window here, and I'll share my screen again. All right, let me just share my screen here again. All right, can we see my screen? You should see conditional access policies. All right, so inside of conditional access policy, I'm going to go back just a little bit here. So here's the home page. So conditional access policies, while I said it's part of Azure AD, it's actually its own feature within here. So we can go to Azure AD conditional access. And I don't have any. This is just a basic tenant that I have, a new tenant. So I'm creating policies, and they have some suggestions on what you can do and create and that sort of thing. I can create a new policy. And so I want to, let's call this one here MFA for admins. And then the idea behind this is that you kind of want, you actually have like lots of room here to put text. So don't make it cryptic if you can help it. Put in exactly what the policy is doing, and kind of start it off with an action word. Is it blocking? Is it requiring MFA? Is it proxying or something along that line? So start off with that. And so here when I'm saying my action is MFA, so it's going to do an MFA for admins. And so and then I want to choose, do I want to do users or groups, that sort of thing. And you can see here if I go with, I can also choose select users and groups, and I can do directory roles. You can see here I have all of these roles. I can do specific users and groups. And that gives me the option to choose all these different groups and things like that. And then I can also do, everyone. Anyone's external as well. The other thing too is try not to group too much. Just like I said with the DLP policies, try not to group too much into a conditional access policy, because it's easier to troubleshoot a problem if you know where the problem's coming from. If you have a bunch of different things happening in one policy, it's hard to troubleshoot what's actually breaking the issue. So I'm going to go with directory roles. I'm going to say that anyone who is a global admin and anyone who is a SharePoint admin is going to be affected. But I want to make sure that I'm excluding my break glass accounts, or in my case, I'm just going to do myself. So I'll make sure that I'm not included in this. Okay, so I have an include and I have an exclude. You want to make sure you always have an exclude so that you protect your environment. Next thing I want to do here is, do I want to look at a particular cloud app, particular user action, whether they're just joining, authentication context. What an authentication context is basically a tag that you can put on a container. So let's say, for instance, you have all of your most highly sensitive information contained in a few sites, but they're changing all the time. You can actually create what's called an authentication context, and this is basically, like I said, just a tag of, for contextual purposes, this information may require more authentication. So we can just say, like, call it Dave's highly sensitive information. And then I can actually use that authentication context and apply it to a site or a team using a sensitivity label. And then what happens is that with conditional access, I can now go and say, is the site or is the location that Dave is accessing, does it have authentication context applied to it? And if it does, then maybe I need to do something more. If it doesn't, then I don't need to worry about this access policy. So that's what that is. We're not going to worry about this right now. We're going to do some conditions here. So we want to look to say, is the current user risk, is it high, low, high, medium? Same thing with sign-in risk. Is he signing in from someplace he shouldn't be? Do I want to block, Androids or iOS, or is David logging in from a Windows phone or something like that? How about locations? Is he logging in from a trusted location? And you can set your trusted locations in the system. Is he accessing it through an app or through a mobile app or something along that line? And then you also can have some different filters and things like that for devices. So again, this is just strictly a role-based conditional access policy. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grant it, and I'm going to say that David has to, anyone with that particular role has to have multi-factor authentication. Then I click select. And then I have the option to report only, on or off, and you can start with report only, and I click create. Now I want to see what's going to happen. So let's say, remember that what if tool I told you? So let's take a look at this here. So David is going to log in, and we're going to see, I'm the only user in here, so this is kind of a bad test, but David's going to log in. Doesn't matter what he's doing. David's logging in. What's going to happen if David logs in? So policies that will not apply because it's on report only. Okay. So let's go back because we can't test that. So let's go back. Let's turn this policy on. Let's do the what if again. Again, David logged in. Doesn't matter where. Oh, it hasn't. Oh, because cloud apps. Hold on a second. Oh, cloud apps. All right. What if? I'm global event. Oh, I set myself up as the exclude. All right, I'm sorry, everyone. So here's the problem. I set myself up as the exclude. So let's just go back just to show you that the what if actually works. It's just MFA, so I don't mind. All right. So now I run the what if. And boom, I'm going to have a policy applied to me, and it's going to require multi-factor authentication. So I can then use this to see what happens if somebody else logs in or that sort of thing. So that's what the what if tool does. And what happens is that say you have 5 or 6, different policies that could be firing. It'll actually list all of them, and it's going to tell you what's going to happen, and it's going to tell you why. All right. So a couple more minutes here. So let's move on to Microsoft Information Protection. So one big thing is something that happened just in the last week or two is Microsoft renamed their compliance console to Microsoft Purview. So everything now, if you're dealing with, your retention, you're dealing with compliance, your data classification, e-discovery, all of that now is in Microsoft Purview. And specifically, we want to go here, and if you want to go to Microsoft Purview or to the compliance there, and even here on, if you look at the admin console, even though they've renamed it, they still call it the compliance console here. So I haven't renamed it everywhere yet, but you click on this compliance in the admin console, and it'll take you to Microsoft Purview. And in here, we can go into information protection. I don't have any sensitivity labels yet. So if I go to sensitivity labels, or sorry, I have some, I just haven't pushed them out yet. But anyways, I can create a label. And one thing to notice here, these ones are all just generated by the system with this dev tenant I have here, is that the lower down the list, it actually matters. So the order of your MIP label actually matters on how sensitive that information is considered. So what that means is highly confidential is considered much more sensitive than public because it's farther down in the list. Not because you said so, it's because of where it is in the list. And the reason for this is that lots of organizations sometimes, they don't want something that's highly confidential going into a public site, because highly confidential information doesn't want to be shared externally, but a public site could be. So if you put something that is lower down on the list inside of a site that is labeled higher on the list, so you put it into a site that's labeled with a public label, you're going to be told that you did that, and an alert can also be generated for admins, so they're aware. So that's why this list matters, because this list defines when that email has to go out. So if I'm creating a label, I just want to give it a name, so we can give it like, Dave's demo. And the same name for the display name. I just realized I didn't have Sorry, I didn't realize people are asking some questions here. Nothing really new. Okay. So then you can also provide a description for users. So the idea behind this is when they hover over the label in the document, they can actually see what the purpose of that label is for. So this is just a label for demo. And so what'll happen is when I push that out, we're not going to have time to do that today, but if I was to push it out and I was trying to label a document, I could actually see that that's what that was for. And then I can choose, is it for files and emails? Is it for groups or sites? And is it for data assets, which is in preview right now? You notice these are all grayed out for me because I haven't turned it on. This tenant, this is, like I said, this is just a new tenant that I haven't really configured yet. But we'll focus on, files and emails. And I have the option to encrypt emails and mark content. So one thing it's going to do is ask me, am I going to configure encryption? So I want to apply these permissions now, or I can let people actually set the permissions. So this is what's called a custom permission sensitivity label. And the difference is that a label that has the permissions assigned here can't be touched by, so a user can't go in and change who has access. This is controlled by administration. And so this is probably the most common. There are more restrictions. They just came out late last year with mid last year with co-authoring. Before you couldn't co-author if it was a restricted label. Now you can, but there are just some restrictions that are a little more harder to deal with when it comes to custom permissions. So assign permissions now. Does this content ever expire? So you could actually say, when I apply the label, does access to that ever expire? You can say, maybe this document only has a lifetime of a year, and after that it's no longer valid. You can actually lock it down so no one can access it because it's no longer valid data anymore, or a number of days after the label has been applied. And do they allow it to have offline access? So remember how I said that every time you open up a document, it goes out to see if the user has access to it. You can actually say, yes, a user can have offline, so that means they can open it. They still have to authenticate. Thanks, Max. You can always say that someone has to authenticate the first time. That is required, the very first time. That can be cached, so they can have access to it offline. Or you can say they never have offline access. They always have to authenticate. So you do have that option. And you can assign permissions, and you have some defaults here. So all users, anybody who's authenticated to the tenant, specific users and groups, and specific email addresses. So we'll just say, all users and groups. So what that means is you actually have to have an email address for this domain in order to access this document. Double key encryption requires you to have your own key that it'll encrypt it with the Azure one, and then on top of that, it'll authenticate it with your own key on top of that. Takes a lot of work to get configured, and if it ever goes down, people can't access their information. So there is some dangers around it, but it's there to add that extra level of protection. On top of that, you have content marking. So you can add a watermark, you can add a header, and you can add a footer. And you can actually even add, what's that text going to be? How big is it going to be? So you want like 32 font size? Do you want it different colors? Do you want it just going straight across? Or do you want it diagonal? And you can have headers and footers. So, I'm a header. And you say, I'm not a header. Haha, but you guys saw I was on my footer. I'm not a footer, not a header. And you click next. And then you can also turn on auto labeling here as well. So you can look for, does the content contain, different sensitive information types, like driver's licenses or health card numbers, that sort of thing. Then you have what's called a trainable classifier. And I'll explain a trainable classifier here really quick. What a trainable classifier is you actually have the ability to teach the environment the different types of content that you use. If you've heard of SharePoint syntax, the form builder and project syntax, it's similar to that, but it's different. Syntax is built mainly for pulling metadata out and determining important information within the document. Tradeable classifiers is this an invoice? Is this an employee document? Is this a application form? That's what it does. It can't tell you, is this a confidential invoice or is this a non-confidential invoice? It doesn't have that ability, especially if the invoices look exactly the same. It can just say, what type of document is this? And on top of that, what it does then is, with that, to build that out, it's, with SharePoint syntax, you can do it within 5 to 10 documents. It's really pretty quick. But with tradable classifiers, it takes more. You have to start with like a library of 200, so it built up 200 positives. Then you have to give it another library, like another 50 to 100 of both positives and negatives. Then you have to train it. Okay, this is one, this is not one, this is one, this is not one, that kind of thing. And so it's a little more onerous. But the idea behind it is if you happen to know that all of your invoices have to be, something like confidential financial or something like that, anywhere in the system, it will actually automatically apply this label for you. So that's what this piece is here for tradable classifiers. If I had groups and sites turned on, we can see in here, and in here you could actually use, so let's say for instance you have SharePoint sites that are shared externally automatically by default, but you create an internal only SharePoint, or sorry, site sensitivity label. You can actually override that setting with your sensitivity label, and that's what happens in these options here. As well as I mentioned before, you can control if a user is trying to access the data in a site from an unmanaged device, you can control how they're able to do that. If they're forced to do it web only, if they're blocked entirely, all of that can be done with a sensitivity label from a site. So this is kind of interesting. This actually used to be called Purview. Now they've renamed it as just a schematized data assets. What that means is if you have structured data in Microsoft 365 and Azure, like SQL servers and or different, like what you have to say, SQL Server, Azure Synapse, Cosmos, even AWS RDS. If you have this type of structured data, you can actually scan it and protect sensitive data in there as well. So it's kind of interesting that they used to call this Azure, they used to call this Purview, but now they've actually renamed the compliance console to Purview. And then the last thing you can do here is you get to see all the different options available to you that you can just reset and check them. All right, everyone, we are down to the last couple of minutes here, so I will won't be able to get into DLP. I do apologize, but the idea behind a DLP policy is you create the policy, you tell it what to look for, and you tell it how many instances you can say specifically of a credit card number, who needs to be notified if it finds it. Do you want to block users? Do you want to allow them to override? All of this is things that you can do with a DLP policy. And let me just get back here. I'm going to. There we go. So if you ever have any questions at any point in time, please, I've got my contact information up here, and please reach out. But otherwise, I thank you all very much for attending, and we have about a minute or two if anyone has any questions. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Dave. It was great.
Thank you, David.
Happy to help.
Thanks, Dave.
Oops, you are in the governance track. Ignore that slide.
Thank you. You had me worried for a moment. That I wasn't on this.
I recognize that voice.
No, you don't. You never heard this voice before.
I mean, only in my head when I'm having a nightmare.
That's
Oh my
right.
God. All right. Well, as we have people trickle in, I'm just gonna kick us off here. I'm your moderator for the session. My name is Max Fritz, part of the user group board here. You're in the governance track, not the automation track. Forgive that slide, please. You can help drive awareness to our user group at O365MN on Twitter, or that hashtag of M365 Workshop Day. We love having you here. Thanks for sticking with us till the end of the day. Although, depending on your time zone, it may be morning, middle of the night, whatever. Few things so you can know. Oops, I should have stopped the recording from our previous session. We'll fix that.